Alrighty. Matt, good to see you.
Thanks, man. Good to be
Thanks
here.
for coming in.
Yeah.
It's good to talk with you. I know we always have good conversations, so I'm excited to talk today. Today we're doing this piece that you kind of sent me this past week. Explain to me a little about it.
This year, I went through some pretty hard stuff.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, I think, soul searching, a lot of trying to make meaning and to make purpose out of what had happened and the hard stuff that, you know, I had to experience.
Yeah.
I love nature. I love being out in nature. I think nature is where I feel most connected to something bigger than myself.
Right.
And so I have these cards, these like nature spirit cards.
Okay.
That I pull every once in a while, and
are they like tarot cards?
kinda, yeah, like oracle cards is what they're called. And what I love about this, and I think this also just like getting into some of like human nature, like we have this incredible ability to just give purpose and meaning to the things that happen to us, and you know, to a lot of stuff, conversations we have, right?
Exactly.
And so I in about, I think it was March, which is my birthday, I was pulling these cards, and I usually pull 3, and I ask a question, and then I sit and I reflect on that question, and I try to
How many cards? Like, is it like a deck of cards?
Yeah, it's like a whole deck.
How many
And,
are in that?
Oh, I don't know, like 60 maybe.
60?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the idea is that like each card is an element of nature, and it represents, it represents certain aspects of either spirituality or and nature. And so I sit with these cards, and I was like, okay, knowing kind of everything that had happened over the past year, knowing that I want to continue to move forward, I ask myself, like, what is this year going to be about for me?
Okay.
And so
And you're like, so you're sitting in your house, and you're sitting in a chair, and you're kind of, do you start with like a meditation first?
Yeah. So like I will sit with these cards, and you shuffle them, and you give a little prayer if you want, to nature, to the spirit of nature, to if it's a spirit guide, if that's what you believe in, something, right?
Okay.
Something bigger than yourself, some sort of guidance.
So you kind of got to let go to something
Yeah.
bigger yourself, and then you start with like a meditation that's like, I'm just going to think about this, I'm going to look at this deck, and then kind of pull these cards that...
Yeah, clear your mind. I'm not like, there are people that do this, and they are like, they're very gifted in how they do this. I just do this for myself.
Right.
And I think that that's part of finding, and giving purpose and meaning to a lot of the things that we go through in our lives.
Of course, yeah.
And so you shuffle these cards, and you might just kind of try to like do a short meditation, do a short prayer.
Right.
And then you ask it, for example, a question, and the question for me at that point in time was, what will this year be about for me?
Okay.
And a couple things you can do. You can just start shuffling the cards, and sometimes cards will just like pop out. Like
Right.
they'll just kind of fall out. And,
Okay.
and you're supposed to look at
Just
the
by
ones.
accident,
Yeah.
right?
But you're supposed to look at those ones because they probably mean something.
Right, the ones that are literally popping out
Right,
of your
right.
hand.
And then sometimes you don't, and you just pull 3 cards whenever it feels right to pull.
Right.
And so I got 3 cards, and the first card was the dandelion.
Okay.
And the dandelion represents healing, which really resonated with me at that point in time because of kind of the hard and challenging things that I had just gone through.
Yeah.
And so, part of me was really like, I want to heal, I want to grow, I want to make this mean something.
Exactly, yeah.
And that was the first card,
The dandelion.
the dandelion.
Okay.
And then the second card was wind. And wind represented movement.
Okay.
And so for me, movement is a big part of my life. I have to move every day. I have to move my body. I feel better when I move my body.
I think that's like most like doctors and like kind of, that's what they say, like movement and physical activity is the best thing you can do. That's the best medication for yourself. And I know you do that a lot. Like you've done like, I think it was, what was the mud?
Oh, yeah.
Like
So a couple things. I got certified as a natural movement trainer.
Okay.
Through an organization called MoveNat.
Okay.
Which is really looking at how you bring more natural movement into your life. And so that's something that has been big in my life for the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And I really love because it allows you to kind of look and find opportunity to move everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. It changes your perspective of what movement is, and I like that a lot.
And what like exercise equipment you need, like you don't
need
necessarily
anything. You just need your body.
So if like someone who's listening is just sitting at their work in a cubicle, and they're like, you know what, I need some movement here. This is kind of the thing that you would kind of do, right?
This is one way you could move your body.
Right.
Yeah. And I think with movement, what really is important, a couple things. One, we're meant to move, right?
Yeah.
And we, over time, and in kind of the way that society often is, we reduce that movement over time. We're sitting more, we're moving less.
Yeah.
And so looking for opportunities to move, and what I've learned about movement from my own life is that if I'm in a bad mood, if I need to change my perspective, the most important thing I can do is move. Get out, go for a walk, go for a run, move my body, get out in nature, even work out.
Yeah.
Right? All of those things change your mood and your mind.
Yeah.
And I think they often have a positive influence on that. And so within the context of these cards, movement was that. It was, the wind representing like the importance of me continuing just to move my body, to not stay still. Stillness is important, but I think there's a time and a place for that.
Yeah.
And then also, moving forward, like the movement of moving forward through things that are hard and challenging in your life. Mm. So that was the second card.
The wind card.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the third card was fire, and the fire represented intensity. Mm-hmm. And what I was really thinking about, as I was reflecting on that was, you might look at that and think, oh, that could be a negative thing, that like the intensity can be seen as something that is negative,
right? Or
that fire could be seen as something that is damaging. Mm-hmm. But I also know, and we know, that fire is a sign for renewal, and it is also, sitting in that intensity and learning from that intensity I think is really important. It's really important for your own personal growth, and at least that's what kind of came up for me as I pulled these cards. And so what I did was I took these 3 symbols, mm-hmm. and I took the meaning behind it, and I downloaded and we've talked about this, like a AI tattoo generator.
Okay.
And I said, these are the symbols, these are what they represent to me, this is what I'm trying to design. And it gave me all these different options. And I wasn't intending to actually get it tattooed. I was just looking for an image that I could put on my phone, which I still have on my phone, and I've shared that with you.
Yeah.
That could just keep me focused on this as I come into this year. My focus right now in my life is around healing, movement, renewal, and learning from the intensity of life.
Yeah.
And so, that was the start of it. And I think, you and I have talked about this and with other tattoos, like I always think it's important that you find something and sit with it for a while, at least for me, before I tattoo it onto my body.
Yeah.
But if it means something and it's significant enough, then putting it on my body and having that for the rest of my life as a reminder of, a particular time in my life, or a particular lesson that I've learned, or a philosophy of life that is important to me, that's been kind of the way that I've approached it. And
like I have lots of tattoos that I necessarily don't like anymore, you know, lots of my ones that I got when I was younger, but at one point in time I did like them, and that's what represented me at the time. So it's something to look back and like, you know what, it's just part of like just my story, and
it's part of who you were at that point in time, right? And you look at that, and that's a reminder of where you were in your life at that point in time. Like,
exactly.
I look at some of mine, and it reminds me of where I was at that particular time in my life, and what I was learning, and what was important to me, and I think that's a beautiful thing too.
So you had the 3, fire, wind, and then the first one, which was the dandelion.
Yeah.
So those are the three that kind of popped out to you, and this is what that image is, and that's such a cool story to have a tattoo that has a meaning like that. I don't think anyone I've ever tattooed has had anything close to that, you know?
Yeah.
So that's like such a cool starting point for an image that's going on your body.
I think so, and I think, you know, like we've talked about before, you know, having these tattoos and these images as reminders, you know, of a time in your life, or, you know, like we've said, like a philosophy of life, or a lesson that you want to remember and keep present in your life, are you know, can be a really important and a really valuable thing.
You grew up Christian, right?
Yeah.
Is that something you still kind of value, or is your kind of way of thinking kind of moved on from Christianity, or is it evolved in a way?
Yeah. So it's definitely evolved, and I think, you know, I grew up in a family that, you know, we went to church regularly. You know, we were told to believe in God, but I also, you know, respectfully, like, grew up in a family that, you know, talked about it, but I didn't really fully, I think, understand it.
Right.
And, you know, at that point in time in my life, and I think like most of us, you know, when we're young, we're given a religion or a philosophy, and then as we grow up and as we get older and we become our own people, you know, we have this opportunity to kind of decide and determine, ideally, what is the right philosophy, what is the right religion. And I think, you know, when we talk about philosophy and religion, you can differentiate between those two things. But I also think, you know, whether it's a religion or a philosophy, the idea is that you have values, principles, guidance, you know, that takes you through life.
What age were you when you kind of realized that, you know, Christianity wasn't for you, or?
I think I was in university.
In university, so you were pretty late in life, like.
Well, I mean, I there was a period of time I didn't think about it at all. Right? You know, like you know, growing up, and, you know, even in high school. I mean, in high school, it wasn't a big part of my life.
No.
And growing up, when I was younger, it was just, this is what we did.
Yeah.
This is, you know, we went to church, we believed in God. That's what you did because that's what your parents. You know, my parents told me we did.
Yeah.
I think when I started to maybe think for myself a little bit more and reflect and become even maybe a bit more self-aware, I went through a period of time in university where I felt very, very connected to something bigger than myself.
Okay.
And at that point in time, I think I saw that as God.
Okay. Like in a Christian sense of God?
Yeah, in the Christian sense of God.
Okay.
And truthfully, I had met a girl, and she was really what was referred to as like straight edge.
Okay. Was she a Christian?
She was Christian.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, you know, I was in this relationship, and I was in this relationship at that point in time with what I saw as God.
Right.
You know, I was, and so at that point in time, I think it really fit for me. I was like learning, and starting to determine more of like how I was going to be guided through life.
Okay.
Right? But then there was a period of time where I started to really question things. Some of the things didn't make sense to me.
Was this while you were still with the girl, or was this after?
It was but then more so when we separated.
Okay, yeah.
Right, when we broke up.
Yeah.
And there, my experience, and again, you know, I'm respectful that everybody has their own experience.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
My experience was I felt a lot of guilt and a lot of shame at that point in my life because I felt like I was not doing the right things. I felt like maybe I was, you know, it was not okay to have the kinds of thoughts I was having about my girlfriend at the time.
Right. So that's like a deep Christian kind of root where, you know, you can't do these things as
yeah
in a relationship unless you're married.
Right.
Is that kind of where your headspace was?
Yeah, there were questions about that. There were questions about like I had questions at that point in time, like, well, who is this Jesus guy?
Yeah.
And why, in my, at that point in time, in my religion, am I so blindly, in my perspective, like so blindly following?
Yeah. Someone you know nothing about?
Yeah. And so, that was a lot of me trying to figure that out over time.
Did you ever dive into what he's about, or was that something that
I was reading the Bible. I was
right.
I was going to church on a Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
I was very open and I think very much trying to understand. And I think, and this is really where, we get into kind of finding your own philosophy, finding your own guiding principles or values or ethics.
Yeah.
I just felt, as I learned more about myself, that just was not the guidance. That was not the philosophy or the religion for me.
Okay.
And so,
this was after your relationship, and are you still in college at this point, where you kind of
still
realized?
in university. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you realized that this kind of wasn't for you, and what was kind of like your next step there?
Yeah, I was reading a lot about different approaches to whether it's religion or philosophy. I did my I did my undergrad in psychology.
Okay.
But I had a really strong interest in philosophy.
Okay.
And I think I always have.
And for those who don't know, what is the definition of philosophy?
Yeah, I don't know if I know.
Yeah.
I think philosophy is in many ways, I think, a way of thinking.
Okay.
And a way of guiding your thoughts. And I mean, everybody can have their own definition of philosophy. But for me, I think having a philosophy is around looking at how the world works and understanding how the world works. Having an understanding of the ethics that are involved in that, or at least the values and the ethics that you want to guide you in your life. I think those are two big parts of philosophy. And I think for me, a big part of philosophy is reflection. And, and for me, it's journaling. It's making sense of and meaning and giving purpose to your life.
Yeah. So what would you say is your kind of philosophy of life to help yourself?
Yeah. So kind of going back to what we were talking about, as like growing up in a more kind of Christian house and home. After university, I was really exploring different philosophies and looking at some different religions. And I came to a place of starting to learn more about Buddhism.
Okay.
So in 2011, I did my first 10-day silent meditation retreat called Vipassana, which is the teachings of Buddha.
Okay.
And so it's 10 days of 10 hours a day meditation, learning about and experiencing the teachings of Buddha.
Are you secluded? Are you without electronics? Are you?
Yeah, so you're with other people, but you've taken a vow of silence, so you're not speaking.
Not speaking at all?
Yeah, you're not reading, writing. You don't look anybody in the eyes while you're there.
Okay.
It's gender segregated. So men are in one area, women are in the other, and the first time that I did this, I wanted to do it because I wanted to take away things that I identified myself as. So I was a speaker, I was a writer, I was a facilitator. I was really comfortable with those things at that point in my life, and I thought I was really good at those things.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like the first time I did it, I was like, I want to see if I like who I am when I take those things away.
Okay.
And I just sit in meditation for 10 days by myself, with myself.
And I know because you love movement a lot. Was there much of that or no?
No, it was walking. You could walk.
Okay.
So the first time you do it, you're in a room. You're in a shared room, but there's a partition between you and the other person.
Yeah.
And you're asked not to do anything that would be disruptive or distracting. So like I did a lot of push-ups and stretching, and I would go for walks during the kind of the free time. Which was the movement that you would get, and that was good. That was, but you would also start to like recognize the things that you would start to crave, and the things that you would like that you might feel attached to. Right.
What was one of those things you noticed?
Movement, right? Yeah. Like exercise at that point in my life, thing. Right? Yeah. So it's like, and that's, and again, that's like I think that's part of the experience. Is like you're taking away things that you are knowingly or unknowingly attached to.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm attached to at that point in time, like exercise, to not do that for 10 days can teach you a lot about yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Like, why is that so important to me? Like, who am I when I'm not doing those things?
And how fast did you notice that it was so important that you were like?
Yeah. I mean, I think leading up to it, I knew I wanted to do it. People were like, why would you do this?
Yeah.
And
what is it called again?
Vipassana.
Okay.
And people would be like, why would you do this? Like, why would you take vacation to go sit and meditate for 10 hours a day?
Yeah.
I think it's more popular. It's more common now than it was in like 2011.
Yeah.
But it was a really important experience for me because I remember kind of going through it, and on day 5, like having this massive breakdown of just like crying.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know why I was crying.
No.
And I remember, these moments of, telling myself like, you told yourself you wanted to do this and you need to prove to yourself that you can. And at that point in time, in that period of my life, I was always trying to do at least one thing a summer that was like challenging and uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
Right? So whether that was like doing Spartan races or obstacle course races, or something that was completely challenging was like not moving and being silent and not talking to other people for 10 days. But it was like such a powerful, I think, experience when I came out of it, because I came out of it at that point in time with some really important, I think, lessons. And these are teachings of Buddha as well, right? Of like non-attachment. So not being attached to, I have to exercise every day, or, I have to do these things to be who I am. And this idea of equanimity, like it was an experiential experience where, you would sit for an hour at a time in meditation. And, part of the teaching is when, you go through this teaching and it's like, okay, you're going to learn about like not giving into the sensations of your body.
Right.
So if I have an itch on my nose, to actually not immediately just itch my nose, but actually pay attention to that and then learn, that passed. Like that itch isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to do anything.
And that could be kind of like a metaphor for, that itch could be a metaphor for movement, could be a metaphor for drinking.
It could be a
smoking.
metaphor for going through hard things, right? Like how common and how much like when something is uncomfortable, I think often we want to just be like, okay, how do I get rid of this feeling? Yeah. Right? Versus like, how do I just sit with this feeling?
And that's what you learn there, is just how to sit with that feeling.
Yeah.
That's kind of what, with the uncomfortableness and the unknown.
Yeah, and sit with that uncomfortableness and not give into it and learn that eventually it passes. Yeah. Right? Which I think is a really important
It's a powerful lesson that most people need to...
That we don't, right?
Yeah,
like
nobody...
Like we don't want to feel uncomfortable. No. So it's much easier to try to do something, whether that's drinking, whether that's, smoking weed, whether that's TV, whether that's, even just like not being by yourself. Yeah. Right?
And that's what that taught you, just to be by yourself and listen to your inner needs.
Yeah. And so that was important to me. The first time I did it too, which was really interesting, was because I did it twice. I did it in I did it in 2011, and then I did it again in 2015, right after or shortly after my dad passed away.
Okay.
And the first time I did it, what I learned was I was always looking at, okay, I thought about it as 10 days.
Yeah.
So, on day one, I'm thinking, okay, I got to get to 10 days. And what I learned through that experience the first time and what I brought into the experience the second time was the idea that you don't, actually not to think about it as like those 10 days, but be like, I just have to get through this meditation, this 1 hour.
Yeah.
Versus I have to get through all 10 days.
So after these retreats, was Buddhism a big part of your life still, or was it?
I think it became a really important part of like my philosophy of my life.
Yeah.
And it still is to a degree. There's a lot of, two things. I mean, one, there's a lot of what I know or I've learned about Buddhism that I really resonate with.
Yeah.
About understanding that like we all to some degree suffer.
Yeah.
Right. And to have compassion for other human beings. Buddhism and the teachings of Buddha, and like I have friends who are practicing Buddhists.
Yeah.
I'm not a practicing Buddhist.
No.
But it's definitely something that I've spent time reading and reflecting and writing on and hopefully practicing in my life.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, I think, connection between or alignment between Buddhism and Stoicism.
Okay.
Which is kind of
what is
Stoicism.
Stoicism?
So Stoicism is about a 2,000-year-old philosophy.
Okay. And it's not a religion?
It's not a religion. It kind of resurfaced probably within the last 10 years or so. It's started to become, I think, pretty popular again. There's not a huge amount of original writing that survived.
Right.
But a lot of people are probably familiar if you know Ryan Holiday, for example, who is a modern Stoic, and he's written a lot about Stoicism. He's kind of really helped to bring it to the mainstream.
Okay.
The first book I read by him was called The Obstacle is the Way, which is a piece of writing that comes from Marcus Aurelius, who was the Stoic Roman emperor.
Is he like the starter of everything?
No. So Stoicism originally was kind of founded or started by a man named Zeno, who was a merchant, and he was shipwrecked. I forget where he was shipwrecked, but he was shipwrecked, and he was in a bookstore looking for something, looking for philosophy.
Yeah.
And he had asked the bookkeeper, where can I learn about philosophy?
Yeah.
And the bookkeeper said, follow that man, and that was walking by, and so he was introduced to this idea of Stoicism, or this concept of Stoicism in that way. But Stoics were known for practicing philosophy publicly.
Okay.
And the name Stoicism comes from, I believe, Stoa, which means the painted porch. This is where they would practice their philosophy. And I think what's really interesting about when we talk about philosophy is and having a philosophy of life is it's not enough just to read it.
Yeah.
You have to apply it, and you have to practice it, and you have to look for opportunities to learn from life and apply those teachings to your life.
Mm.
And so the Stoics that are most popular, the original Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, who was a slave, and was the teacher, I believe, to Marcus Aurelius.
And how old are these guys?
Thousands of years old at this point. Yeah, like 2,000 plus years ago. And then Socrates.
Okay.
Those are kind of the three most, I think, at this point in time, the most well-known Stoics. Okay. But I think also something that's really important to call out is when you hear Stoicism, some people think Stoicism is about holding back emotion and having no emotion.
Okay.
Like small s stoic is what it's kind of referred to sometimes. It's this idea of like, well, I don't express my emotions. I'm stoic.
Okay.
But that's not the case. That's not really what Stoicism is about. Stoicism is about understanding, and there's a lot of connection between Stoicism and, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay.
That Stoicism is often about paying attention and recognizing the things that you have control over and the things that you don't.
Okay.
Right? So, for example, I have no control over what someone says or does to me.
Yep.
But I can control how I react or respond to what they say or do.
Right.
So it's this idea that, you know, I like the idea it's like you control your thoughts, they don't control you. That you have the opportunity to, you know, you have control over your attitude, your behavior, and your beliefs.
Yep.
But I don't have control over the things that happen to me externally. I don't have control over, you know, hard challenges that might show up in my life. You know, I don't have control over whether or not my car breaks down on the way home today.
Right.
But I have control over how I would react or respond to that.
So is there like a Bible for Stoicism?
I don't think there's a Bible.
No?
I think that
like,
there are
per se?
I think there are some there's definitely some like primary readings that you could dig into.
Yeah.
If you wanted to look at like the kind of the originals, like the OGs.
Yeah.
Like Marcus Aurelius' Meditations.
Okay.
Is a very that's so Marcus Aurelius was known for, and this is a Stoic practice as well, of, you know, often ending the day in reflection and journaling. And he would be writing these letters to himself. They weren't meant to be shared with anybody else. And so they're referred to as his meditations.
Okay.
And
these are all just letters he wrote to himself that were published?
that eventually, that were published. So that's a great place to start. You know, I really enjoy and read regularly is Epictetus.
Okay.
And it's sometimes referred to, depending on how it's been translated. The version that I have of his writing is called The Manual.
Okay.
And it's about living a philosophy of life. And so they're very short reflections and ideas. And I think the idea of reading Stoicism in that way is that you don't read it all in like one sitting.
Right.
You know, I read a page. Like I like to start my morning with reading a little bit of Stoicism and figuring out, how does that apply to my life right now? What can I do to apply that to my life right now?
Right.
Ryan Holiday has a great book called The Daily Stoic.
And he's like a modern...
Modern, yeah.
Like, is he like still alive? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's got a great book called The Daily Stoic, which is, 365 Stoic meditations.
That you can start your day with?
Okay. And then he kind of elaborates on it and makes it more modern.
Okay.
So that's a really good one as well. Socrates is another, Socrates and Socrates' writing.
And like, who is Socrates? I always hear this name. Like,
So he was a Stoic philosopher.
Okay. Like, was that his main, like?
So from what I understand and what I know about Socrates is he was an advisor. He was quite wealthy. And quite well respected within, I think, Roman society.
Okay.
And he was also the advisor and mentor to, at that point in time, the Roman Emperor Neo.
Okay.
And from what I understand, and I may get some of this wrong, but Neo was a really horrible emperor.
Yeah.
And so. I think it's interesting with Socrates because he was a Stoic philosopher who often wrote about living the moral and the good life, and he was also advisor to a very immoral and arguably horrible Roman emperor at the time.
And what was his name, the emperor?
Neo.
Neo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did he help this guy at all, or did any of his?
I mean, it's hard to say.
Did any of his words get through to the guy?
From what I remember, and again, I'm not I read about the history of it. I read about like the Stoics themselves.
Yeah.
There's a great book called Lives of the Stoic, and it goes through kind of all of the known Stoics.
Okay.
At that point in time, but from what I recall, I think Neo banned him. What's the word?
Exiled?
Exiled him.
Really?
Yeah.
So this was the Roman times too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
So.
Yeah, you always hear like Socrates and what's it, Pluto? Oh no.
Pluto's not, or Plato.
Plato, yeah.
So Plato wasn't Stoic.
No.
Plato was a philosopher.
Okay.
But from what I understand, and no, he wasn't a Stoic philosopher.
Okay. Yeah, you always hear these people like, and I don't really know what they did. Like, did Socrates or like Plato have like something they were famous for, like a saying, or is it just their way of life?
I think it was a way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
And it was a way of living your life. And you know, arguably, I don't know. Like, I don't know if they were, you know, who they were at that point in time.
Right.
You know, all I can really, I think, speak to is, you know, how we view them now.
Yeah.
And the influence that Stoic philosophy has had on, you know, things like cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
Right. There's an element of, and I've gone through cognitive behavioral therapy myself.
And what is that? Explain that.
So the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy, from my experience and understanding, is that like how you look at how your mind influences your behavior, right?
Okay.
And how like your thoughts can control your emotions.
Okay.
Right. And looking at, you know, how do you
change that?
How do you change that?
Okay.
How do you, you know, how do you change that?
Okay. How do you think better in ways that will end up like growing outwards?
Yeah.
So you came across like Stoicism, and would you say that is your main like kind of philosophy for life?
I think now it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think now it is. I think, and part of the reason is because I think it resonates with me, and it makes the most sense to me personally.
Okay.
So when I first kind of started to become aware of Stoicism was around 2015.
Okay.
I was reading this book called Resilience by a guy named Eric Greitens, and he had talked about Stoicism and this idea of, you know, it's almost like decide who you want to be and then be that person.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily exactly Stoicism, but it's about understanding that, you know, how do you address and approach the hard things that happen to you in life, in a way where you can put purpose and meaning to those things, where, you know, you have a sense of not control over what's happened, but how you respond to what's happened.
Okay.
And really, you know, there's got to be some kind of connection here in some way. As I got introduced to this, probably within weeks, my dad passed away.
Okay.
And so my dad had passed away from his third heart attack very suddenly. It was really, really hard on my mom, really, really hard on our family.
How old were you at this time?
I was 33, 34.
Okay.
My dad was just about to turn 57, so
okay.
Pretty young.
Yeah, that's very young.
And, you know, I'd just kind of been introduced to Stoicism.
Okay.
And so, you know, over the past 10 years, as I've become more aware of the philosophy of Stoicism and, you know, reading it and trying to find ways to apply it, and again, it's a practice.
Yeah.
And you know, what's been important for me in terms of how I've learned about this is it's not about, like I said, it's not about just reading something and knowing it. It's really looking at how you apply it and live it in your life.
Right.
And so the Stoics have a lot of reminders and a lot of ways in which they would remind themselves of these things. Whether it's like, you know, sayings like the obstacle is the way.
Okay.
Right? That you know, Marcus Aurelius.
That's what Marcus Aurelius, is that one of his famous quotes?
I think that's a well-known quote. Yeah. You know, and so, and you know this because you've tattooed these on my body.
Yeah.
You know, I have a lot of tattoos that are dedicated to those things, right? So,
yeah.
So this is Memento Mori, which is this idea that Marcus Aurelius wrote about, which is essentially like you could leave here today.
Yeah.
And so for me, and it's a practice, it's a visualization, like Stoics were known for a lot of like visualization, like not being attached to things. So knowing like, hey, you know, your favorite cup could break.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's it. Like you don't own it.
No.
Right? But then you apply that to other things that are more important in your life, like your children or your you know, your partner or
your car,
your
or
job,
your house, or your job,
your car, or your house, or whatever those things. It's this idea that like nothing is actually owned, right?
Yeah.
Like you're just borrowing these things,
Yeah.
and to appreciate them while you have them, but also, you know, to not feel and not be attached to them to a point where it would cause you, you know, really incredible pain and suffering.
Yeah. So Marcus Aurelius, was he the one who created the memento mori saying?
He wrote about this.
Okay, he wrote about it?
Yeah. And so the idea around memento mori for me has been this, you know, this simple idea of like, you could leave here today, which is a reminder of like, hey, this could be the last conversation that you and I ever have.
Exactly.
And knowing that, how would I want that conversation to go? Or, you know, with my kids, it's like, hey, you know, if I'm upset and you know, angry about something they did, how do I want to approach that? Because, you know, if the last thing that I ever did was yell at them for something that's, you know, arguably pretty stupid, is that how I would want to leave this world?
Right.
Right? So it's a good reminder.
And is that how you, when your dad died, that's what brought you? Was it the memento mori saying that brought you when he died?
No, because I didn't know that at that point
No.
in time. And like, if I actually look back, you know, there was like the weekend before my dad passed away, I remember him coming over to my house, and I was in like a bad mood, and he wasn't feeling well, and I don't think I wasn't kind to him, right? Like, and so I regret that. I look back on that moment, and I'm like, I wish I had approached that differently, right? Because I won't get that moment back. Yeah. And so that's almost like the realization and the application of it. But I didn't learn about this until afterwards.
Okay.
You know, another saying that the Stoics are I think, you know, famous for is amor fati, which is love of fate.
Okay. And that's where your tattoo says.
And so that says, it says that as well. And so the idea of love of fate is, you know, to be able to feel grateful for all of the things that happen to you.
The good and the bad.
The good and the bad, right? Because from the bad, hopefully, comes something good.
Yeah.
And so, you know, these are just like these reminders that I have now, but that I think a lot of Stoics, modern and you know, and kind of the original, would keep top of mind for themselves, right?
Okay.
To practice that philosophy.
Right.
The Stoics are also known for their 4 cardinal virtues. Which
what is
are the kind of the virtues that guide Stoicism.
Okay.
Which are wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance.
Okay.
And so.
And didn't we do a tattoo with
we
all
did
this?
that.
Oh yeah.
We did this one, right?
Yeah.
And that's Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
In the center there, a statue or bust of Marcus Aurelius.
And we incorporated all those.
And we incorporated all
virtues.
of this.
I remember that. Yeah.
And you know, and that's one that I like to go back to and try to, you know, figure out like, what do I need to work on the most right now, right? Sometimes it's courage, like it's having conversations with people that I know I need to have.
Yeah.
And, you know, the courage to do the right thing.
Yeah.
You know, wisdom is about, I think, you know, always being willing to learn and to apply what you learn to your life, right? And that's a daily habit.
Yeah.
Justice is around, you know, just doing what is right.
Yeah.
You know, and ideally and hopefully leaving the world a better place by, you know, through the people that you interact with and what you do. Right? It can be small, it doesn't have to be big. It could just be you know, how you make somebody feel on any given day. And then temperance, which I think is one that's like harder now probably than it's ever been in our society, because we live in this instant gratification world, is about recognizing when you need to have the discipline and the ability to refrain, right?
Right,
That
yeah.
could be online shopping, that could be drinking,
Yeah.
that could be, like it could be anything, right? It's about looking and saying like, where do I need to practice this virtue of temperance in my life?
Right.
And the Stoics were known again, for doing these types of practices where they would live in very uncomfortable circumstances, even if they were wealthy,
Right.
to wear very simple clothing, to
Live well below their means.
well below their means, to sleep on hard surfaces because it's uncomfortable, but to be able to do those things as a practice,
Yeah.
which I think can be a really valuable and important part of,
Just to humble yourself.
humble yourself, right?
And I think that's a big point in Buddhism, right? Like that's a big does it stem from Buddhism in a way, or
I don't know. I
mean there's even with Christianity there's always like the golden rule,
Right.
do unto others as you would do unto yourself. There's always this kind of centered kind of thing that most of them kind of
there's overlap,
Yeah.
right? And again, I think, going back to this idea of finding a philosophy of life, for example, or a religion, but, finding something that works for you,
Yeah.
like finding something that you resonate with, that you understand, that you can apply to your life.
Yeah.
It's not stoicism for everyone.
no.
And it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Right? But I think the idea is that it guides you. It gives you something to hold yourself accountable to.
Yeah.
And I hope, it's something that, for me, it's like allows me to learn and hopefully be, slowly over time, like a better person.
And I think that's a good note to kind of finish on here that's kind of like what most people want to be able to do is be a better person. That's kind of how your outfit has kind of
Yeah.
gravitated towards with Stoicism, and I think that's what most people want to.
I think a lot of people do. I think some people maybe don't know. Like
Yeah.
and you did this tattoo for me, and I want to just talk about this because
Yeah.
I think this is another. It's not Stoic, but it kind of speaks to it too. Is it's this idea, this understanding, and this kind of experience that I had years ago of like this idea that a lot of us go through life, and we can either have a map or we can have a compass.
Right.
And if you have a map, often it's like, I know where I am, I know where I want to go, and I know exactly how I'm going to get there because
Yeah.
it's laid out.
Yeah.
I don't live with a map,
No, and a compass will definitely tell you the right
A
direction,
compass
but not
is
the
more
exact
about,
route.
a
Okay.
compass is more like, okay, I generally know the direction I want to go,
Yeah.
and I kind of have to every once in a while stop and
Yeah.
check to make sure I'm going in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
And
But
there are
a map-
peaks and valleys to that.
Yeah.
And so that's the idea, I think, with having a philosophy of life is that it can act as a compass
Yeah.
where from time to time you have to pause and stop and say, am I living these virtues?
Yeah.
And if I'm not, what do I need to do? Right?
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's an amazing kind of point, and I love what you were saying. I hope some people can kind of just kind of relate to what you were saying, and hopefully find their way through their own kind of
Yeah.
compass. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to, you don't have to have a map, and I think that's the beauty in it of
Yeah.
just like what you were been talking about, that there's no kind of exact map to life, and it's just these things that are around us that give us that compass of which is right, which is
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
north, which is south, which is bad, which is good, and I think that's a beautiful thing to say. Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt, for coming on, and it was good to talk to you about this, and we're going to do some more work here, but I love what you're saying.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.